Good evening, everybody. Uh, The Durham Public Schools Board of Education special meeting is now in session. At this time, we wish to extend a warm welcome to everyone who is joining us this evening. The interpreters for tonight are Marta Romo Urgiles and Vanessa Peña Ramirez. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. The first item on the agenda is a moment of silence. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is agenda review and approval.
Move approval of the agenda as presented.
Second.
It's moved by Ms. Byer and seconded by Ms. Chavez to approve the agenda as presented this evening. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, please use the same sign. Right, passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is transportation plans. And with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Webb.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Good evening, board members, and Dr. Lewis and cabinet members and all in attendance. We have a presentation tonight responding to some of the questions that were submitted to our transportation team. Mr. Palmer is going to be presiding over that. He is joining us remotely. We have with us some of his staff, and he'll introduce those folks that will talk to you. Kristen Berkshire is here, and I think Kristen's the only one with us tonight. Mr. Palmer, are you with us?
Indeed, I am, Dr. Webb.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Mr. Palmer, the voice from the ceiling. We're glad you're here. So with your permission, I'll turn it over to Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Dr. Webb.
Oh, Mr. Palmer, sorry, before you get started, I'm sorry, I forgot to say one thing. We have 4 board members here this evening, but unfortunately, 3 board members were unable to join us because this meeting was scheduled at the last minute, or it was a specially called meeting, so not everybody's able to join, but we did feel like it was important to go ahead and continue having the transportation discussion in advance of Thursday's meeting. So, I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead, Mr. Palmer.
Okay, and thank you, Vice Chair Carter-Otten and Dr. Webb, Dr. Lewis, and administrative and board members in the room with us this evening. We are providing an overview of progress made since we last met on December 19th. And with that, let's go to the next slide. Thank you. The board has submitted questions to the administration, and we are putting those together in 3 groups around family responsibility zones, secondary magnet express stop service, and routing improvements and optimization. In addition, the administration has administered a transportation survey, and there are some early results on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have 3 topics within board submitted questions. Wanted to give an overview here and then make ourselves available for additional board discussion and questions sort of topically, thematically. With respect to family responsibility zones, there have been several questions about the approach to developing our DPS family responsibility zones, which we have an acronym for FRZ, as well as questions from the board about when and if maps will be available. We can speak a bit on that tonight. Community support, how can volunteers get involved, and how can the community of Durham support its schools and children, particularly with respect to walking groups and carpooling. And then district and school communication to families. How will we know at a family level if this family responsibility zone would impact a family or a student, and in certain extenuating circumstances, the appeals process itself. So we want to start up front with a review of the approach to developing the family responsibility zones. Again, here in North Carolina, it is established that school systems are providing transportation for students that live 1.5 miles or further from their home to school. What we are aware of is that here in Durham, we do not currently have established walk zones or family responsibility zones prior to the December 19th vote by the board. And many of those family responsibility zones, as we've discussed, are a quarter mile or a half mile from the school, and none go further than 1 mile. That's important because even though the 1.5 miles is sort of the state standard and a common practice for most school systems and LEAs here in North Carolina, our approach to developing the family responsibility zones was a bit more different and reflective of our values here in Durham, prioritizing, in particular, safety and access to school for families. So we looked at our existing road speeds, and I will remind the board not only the speed of the road, but the traffic of the road, to consider the infrastructure and routes that students, if they chose to walk within a certain perimeter from home to school, could access the school site itself. That's considerate of existing sidewalk as well as low-speed roads, 25 miles an hour or lower, and those intersections that would need to be navigated or crossed to ensure that there is an appropriate either a full-on traffic light along with interventions like a pedestrian hybrid beacon or other pedestrian activated devices to enhance safety. In addition to that, once we looked at it from a sort of technical planning and engineering lens on infrastructure, we also worked with our school principals to ensure that their input and voices were heard as well. And we're able to, I would say, enhance access to school within those areas. We adjusted 5 overall family responsibility zones based on principal feedback and a technical review. And that has reduced the overall impact slightly as we look at the number of bus routes and/or students that are impacted by the FRZs. Now, with regards to geography and the maps themselves, we have received approval from the administration and are excited that we have worked with public affairs to make those maps available through the DPS transportation website. Those will be posted this week. And in there, we'll have access to street names. Again, every family that is directly already living within these geographies has received communication from the district and schools. This is more for, I think, community awareness and any efforts to galvanize support and/or resources for students or schools of the 21 that have family responsibility zones. In addition, with respect to community support, while DPS cannot directly at an administrative central office level connect volunteers with schools and families, we are here to support our school leaders as they work through kind of liaising between advocates as well as volunteers and our students and families to promote walking groups and carpooling, any efforts that would reduce the burden of student arriving to school safely within these smaller geographies. And again, district and school communication, we've been, prior to the break itself, communicating directly through principals with our families, including take-home letters and robocall notifications to impacted families. I know there has been a question if folks did not get a call, was it an oversight? And oftentimes folks are finding that the actual eligibility areas that we're talking about are quite a bit smaller than that state standard. Again, many of our areas are between a quarter and a half mile. A few stretch up to a mile where there is extended sidewalk connectivity in some of our newer neighborhoods that have appropriate infrastructure. And then lastly, in accordance with 6322 in the appeals process, we are working through that to have extenuating circumstances. And again, this is very much like a bus stop appeal process or others within the district. And so with that, let me go to the next thematic grouping. And we're available this evening to answer any additional questions we may have. Next slide, please. Secondary magnetic express stop service. One of the things that we're being very cautious about is ensuring that we've had the opportunity to work with our school principals, both those schools, DSA, Rogers Horror, and Creative Studies, that are receiving or are slated to plan to receive Express Stop service, and those schools that are servicing as a hub hosting site. These are areas, again, middle and high schools throughout Durham City and County, wherein families would bring their student, and then the students would access the express stops to DSA, Rogers Horror, or Creative Studies. We are continuing to finalize those locations with school leadership to ensure that not only that the locations are a fit, but also the pickup and drop-off times in accordance with the other traffic patterns at those schools. And there are questions about the supervision of students. We are in transportation not equipped or staffed to provide direct on-site supervision. I know there were questions about that, and that relates to the times itself. And again, encouraging families that there is important value if safety is a concern for your student or the supervision of students is a concern, to go ahead and arrive in accordance with when the scheduled express stop times are, as well as for afternoon departure as well. That district and school communication, again, we're talking current bus riders that are routed for DSA, Rogers Horror, and Creative Studies. We are intentionally wanting to ensure that those locations and times have been reviewed with our secondary academic leaders at the school level. And then communication that goes to families this week will have those places and times embedded within the district communication. Next slide, please. And lastly, with regards to routing improvements and optimization, I want to reset for the board and the community that route optimization is truly a year-round endeavor wherein our student ridership team is seeking to maximize the appropriate, effective, and safe use of our resources. There are several statutes here in North Carolina that specify, the proximity of our school bus stops. We're continually reviewing that to ensure that they're in compliance not only with state legislation, but also we have had many different stop appeals for a variety of reasons. And so our routing improvements and optimization currently, I shared at the last board meeting that our ridership numbers have increased over, really since this work began in October and then into November. Those ridership numbers we were right at about 19,000 and are now at 19,500. The consolidation itself, I want to speak to that and ensure that we've started our stop and route consolidation in the fall of 2023 in anticipation for the opening of 24-25. Our student ridership and routing team is perpetually looking at any opportunities to enhance efficiency and level of service. But we do want to emphasize that routing improvements and optimization without additional efforts at a district, school, or family level with student ridership, those efforts around routing improvements and optimization are really trying to ensure less stress for our drivers and overall higher levels of service for our families. That includes consistency, timeliness, and length of our bus routes. And when we have an opportunity to collapse or consolidate routes, then we certainly would do so. That is, again, an ongoing endeavor. Our ridership team has been working on this aspect as we're also braiding in the other improvements with regards to the family responsibility zones and the express stop service. So I wanted to name that here, that as we are enhancing our routing, it may not be in a direct savings of number of routes carried as much as it may be increasing our overall level of service for timeliness and consistency of service getting kids to school. Okay, next slide, please. And with that, I will hand it back to the administration. I believe Dr. Lewis has a few points of information with our transportation survey.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Palmer, and good evening, board members and members of the public. As indicated by our Vice Chair Carter Otten at the beginning of the meeting, this is a special call board meeting. If you recall, during our last board meeting, we shared that we would provide an update at our January 9th board meeting, and so tonight allows us an opportunity to just provide the board an update in terms of where we've been since the last meeting as we continue to prepare for January the 9th. Within the communication that we sent out to our families, particularly those families that are impacted by the family responsibility zones and the express stops, we sent out a survey or a thought exchange to gather some questions from them to further assist us with the operationalizing these family responsibility zones as well as the express stops. Next slide, please. And so this thought exchange that we sent out is just an opportunity for us to gather collective intelligence, but also it allows us to focus on where we're hearing, what we're hearing from our parents and focus on those areas that we're hearing concerns from the most. And so the question that we asked our families is, what are your thoughts regarding the implementation of express stops and family responsibility zones to solve DPS's transportation challenges? And so this was an opportunity for them to provide feedback to district leaders. Again, this is just a snapshot as of today. We did let our families know that they would have up until January 9th, which is Thursday, to complete that. And so we'll bring back the final results of the survey and definitely go in more detail than what I'm going to go through tonight. But I just did want to provide high level as of today in terms of where we are with the feedback that we are receiving from our families. Next slide. So as we look at the breakdown of participation, again, this was just sent to families that are impacted by family responsibility zones and express stops. As of today, earlier today, we had about 417 participants, and they left 234 thoughts, but they also rated, and I just checked a moment ago, it's over 5,100 thoughts that they have rated. And so what they do is, and we use this tool during the latter part of my listening and learning session as well. They'll look at the thoughts and then they'll rate the thoughts that they agree with or the questions that they agree with. And what that does is allow us to focus on where we need to focus our efforts on. And so an average participants rated about 12 thoughts. Next slide. Quick breakdown of the role. We did ask the role, were your parent, student, staff, or other, and you can see overwhelmingly 92% of the respondents are indeed parents. Next slide. We think about our Durham Public Schools families, 84% were English-speaking families and 15% were Spanish-speaking families. Next slide. And what this tool also does is really look at themes. What are we hearing from our families? What are we hearing from our communities? And it rates these themes based on what our families are saying. And so just, again, a snapshot. Some of the feedback and questions that our families are asking us or the comments that they're leaving us are centered around equity issues. They have a lot of questions around the express stops and also are leaving comments as it relates to family hardships and also some comments on rotational busing. What this tool allows us to do is to click on either one of those bars and go directly to those thoughts that were related to, for example, rotational busing or those thoughts that are related to equity issues so that we can address and be able to respond to those concerns from our families. And so if we were to sum up just where we are today with the feedback that we received from our families, the next slide just kind of highlights the responses, again, as of today, of what we're hearing from our families. Next slide. And so the responses highlight significant concerns with the implementation of express stops and family responsibility zones. And so we wanted to make sure that we're transparent and we'll tell you exactly what our families are sharing with us. Parents express difficulties in driving their children to school daily, safety issues with children walking in the dark, and the impracticality of for working parents. Many emphasize the inequity of the plan, particularly for low-income families, single parents, and those without reliable transportation. There are worries about increased truancy, traffic congestion, and a lack of supervision at express stops. The timing of the implementation mid-school year is also criticized for causing undue hardships. Overall, the plan is seen as shifting the burden from districts to families, exacerbating existing challenges. So again, that's probably what you've been hearing as you were receiving emails as well. And so again, we wanted to make sure that we're providing real-time, transparent feedback that we're receiving from our families as of today. And as I mentioned, we will come back, you can go to the next slide, we will come back on Thursday with the full breakdown of the feedback that we've been receiving from our families. It's time. Open it up for any questions as it relate to those areas. And please know we will have additional details and information to share at a January 9th meeting.
All right, board members. Would you like to kick it off with some questions or comments? Okay, Ms. Harold Goff.
Um, I'm really here, just to hear the update and to prepare for Thursday. But I do so appreciate, seeing the information coming in from families and that being considered for what we're going to decide on Thursday. Thank you so much for that data. I'm looking forward to seeing, hearing, how far that goes. Also just really thinking about, wanting to really understand or be assured that what we're looking at now as a Band-Aid doesn't prevent the proactive approach to, what we can do, what we need to do for really getting bus drivers in the seats. I don't want the Band-Aid to become the new normal. So very interested in what we decide is going to lead to those stronger campaigns for getting bus drivers in the seats, so that it doesn't become the new normal, so that these things that we're having to do quickly don't become the new normal. Let me see what I said here. My only other thought has to do around, which is, of course, we're seeing in the emails and through the data around equity. I think that is my concern around the decision is that because this is, a response that is urgent, it would be very difficult to make any of these decisions completely equitable quickly. And so when we're doing it, again, it just goes back to, we have to really address the heart of the issue, which is the shortage, the staff shortage. So I'm looking forward to when we can get to that conversation and hopefully, come up with some solutions, some answers for what we can do that's innovative to get more people in the seats more quickly. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harold Goff. Is there anything that transportation wanted to say in response to that before we move on to somebody else's or questions or comments?
I'll be happy to respond. Thank you, Ms. Harold Goff, for your comments and your concerns and the comments. We have shared, and I think everyone is in agreement, the permanent solution to this is to have enough bus drivers, CDL, licensed CDL with PNS endorsements who work for Durham Public Schools and drive the buses. And to that effort is ongoing, and all of our conversations, regardless if we're talking about a short-term fix, a long-term fix, they always come back to what can we do to increase personnel, to increase family members who are there, professionals who are providing that skilled task every day. So that is the only permanent solution, and I appreciate you sharing that. As far as decisions moving forward, I mean, that is our main long-term goal. The length of time these other initiatives are, that would be a discussion with the board and basically when they start and continuing. We're open to and we appreciate this ongoing conversation where we're working together as partners on this. Our transportation team is working for the here and now, but they're also working to resolve the problem completely and permanently.
Thank you, Dr. Webb. Yes, Ms. Chavez.
Well, thank you. I want to echo the appreciation for the survey especially, and I like the tool that you all used to for people to lift up, other people's thoughts. That was it gave us a good picture of what many families are concerned about, and also is reflective of the emails that we have received. But I that kind of outreach is great, and we should, continue to do that. I also appreciate that you contacted families individually. That I think that's really helpful, and it's helpful to know for us. Um, and and then I also wanted to just appreciate the many, mostly parents who have written to us about their concerns, and because it really gives a fuller picture of what people are thinking, worried about, also, trying to, ways that people are trying to solution as well. So first on the topic of recruitment and retention, the long-term goal and strategy, I just want to put out there that I thought of this when you were talking, Ms. Harold-Goff, that perhaps we want to have another special meeting around that in February or March, but another emergency meeting, but about our long-term strategy. So I'm just putting that out there, where we can embed it within our, regular monthly meeting. But again, I think that's going to take considerable conversation and discussion, a lot of strategizing. And I know among board members, we're thinking on these different levels, as you all are. Where should, where should we put our energy into sort of inquiring about what the plans and strategies are, whether that be the Band-Aid, solutions, or the longer term recruitment and retention strategies. So I wanted to offer that. As I was thinking before this meeting, I think that as I was reading through my emails, I caught up on my emails today, hundreds of emails. So I was really thinking about how we're applying an equity lens to this situation. And I will say with the rotational busing, we did not get a lot of emails about that. We got concerns, but then I think it has been a pretty effective Band-Aid approach for managing the chaos that people were experiencing before. But it was equalizing. It wasn't equity, because there were a lot of kids, as we heard about, who missed multiple days of school. Certain buses that routinely didn't run. It didn't prioritize those students. I know I asked about that, but the plans have been laid out. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be as it was designed, but it equalized everything. It is appropriate sometimes to equalize everything, but also with an equity approach. We've all seen the diagram where some people get the, bigger footstool to see over the fence. And so I'm thinking about that now. Who needs a bigger footstool to see over the fence? I will say I was, some schools have more PTA infrastructure than others. We've talked about that, and so there is sometimes, more advocacy, which I appreciate, from those groups that have been able to sort of gather input from a lot of people. So I am still, even with the family responsibility zones, concerned about those who are not, that we're hearing, who really don't know what they're going to do to get their kids to school. They have younger kids, or they only have one person they rely on for childcare who can't drive the child or something like that. So I guess right now I'm thinking a lot about the policy, the appeals process, and 6322, and how that can be laid out very clearly. I know we talked about that, but before the family responsibility zones would go into effect, so that we are able to basically capture those with the highest need who really, really need it. And so I'm just thinking about how we can apply that equity lens, and those who are more privileged. There are families who, for whom not having bus service, it really changes their schedules. They work all day, 2-parent household or 1-parent household, but they might be able to afford childcare, or afford someone to pay, to drive their kid to and from school if they're affected by the family responsibility zone. I'm just thinking about how we can ask those with more privilege to use it, and those who have the greatest need that we can serve them. So that's what I would ask as we continue to work on the implementation of this. And then I want to note that we have received the most concerned messages about express stops. We've received a lot. So I would be interested, just when you report the survey results on Thursday, to know if you are able to break this down, who was responding from who's affected by the family responsibility zones and who's affected by the express stops. So I wanted to note that. Questions, let's see. So let me ask this question. The appeals process would be one thing. Are there other ways that you all feel we can prioritize who are low income, or who, I mean, that's a sweeping way of saying someone with less resources, and people may have more or less like social resources, or, network resources, that kind of thing. So we don't know, but is there a way we can prioritize students who have less resources, whether that be financial or social, familial, capital, or network kind of resources?
Thank you, Ms. Chavez. Any thoughts in response to that before we move forward?
Thank you for that. And I'll ask Mr. Palmer and the team to weigh in just a moment. I will say we're working on the mechanics of this, making it work, making the initiatives, implementing the initiatives. We will look to the school level, that the parents are not necessarily communicating their needs to the district level. They would communicate that to the school. There are a number of resources that our team is going to make sure are available. We certainly aren't endorsing or recommending, but making those opportunities available, not only to individual parents, but to the schools as well. And then the schools will be working with us, and we want to help everyone we can within the resources, abilities, and charge that we have as well. Mr. Palmer or team, would you like to expand upon that?
Thank you, Dr. Webb. I wanted to ask for just a moment, Ms. Chavez, a clarifying question to your question. In respect to prioritizing low socioeconomic status students, are you referencing, could you say more about prioritizing with, are we talking, well, please say more about what priorities you're looking for us to bring in, or a little bit more about the question itself?
Sure. I specifically mean for families within the family responsibility zones. And when I looked at that survey data, the top things were equity. I didn't write down all of them, but working families, like all these things. Oh, thank you. Oh, yes, that's right. We have this. Family hardship. Okay, working parents. It's a lot about parents needing to go to work. It's a lot. I mean, what we're hearing is families with, there are families who only have one car. There are, parents have to go to work. If they can't go to work and put their kid on the bus, they have to quit their job. That's going to cause problems immediately for their family. And so a lot of this has to do with money. It has to do with finances. It has to do with, survival on that level. So that's kind of where my question comes from. Is there a way that we can, are there any other ways to kind of decipher who most needs transportation that we're cutting it out, that we would be potentially cutting it off from with the family responsibility zones? Does that clarify?
I think, Ms. Chavez, to repeat back, looking to prioritize low-income students that live within the FRZs, and in particular, alternate means of transportation. Is that what you're inquiring about, or some other form of a resource that we could provide or supplement those families? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thanks. I like the way you put that.
Okay. I think that's something that certainly I'm going to look to Dr. Webb and the administration on with regards to what would be in the portfolio of additional resources that are available. Right now, our conversation, our lens has been really fixated on the delivery of the safe arrival of students and what we can do with our limited school bus drivers in relationship to those students that have requested service. And so in that space of alternate means of accessing school, I think there is certainly an opportunity there to lay out what might those resources include? How could those be other things in addition to yellow bus service? What other efforts might there be? And I certainly think that is a board and administration sort of galvanizing point, if you will.
And what I would add to that is our ultimate goal is to ensure that we are preparing our scholars for that next level and ensuring that we're able to reach our mission and ensure that we're able to meet each individual school's goals. And so as we think about, just some of the feedback from the survey data and what I've been hearing from board members that are things that are coming through emails, and whether it's working families, and I certainly want to be respectful of some of our families that come from low socioeconomic backgrounds that do have transportation, and maybe the working families that may need it. And so I've had experience, and we briefly discussed this as it relates to looking at these at a case-by-case basis. And so if my home is this building and my school is the Durham Bulls Stadium, I just looked it up, it's like a half a mile from here. And I was once getting transportation, but I'm no longer receiving transportation. And I must come from a single parent home. My mom has to be at work at 5 a.m. Working with transportation or some other resources, if there's a bus that comes right here on Cleveland Street, even though I don't qualify for transportation, again, looking at a case-by-case basis, is there an existing route that's going to come by my house that I still can put this child on? We have to make sure that we're making student-centered decisions, but also at the same time ensuring that what we're hearing from the survey, what we're hearing from this community, that we were able to respond to our families. And so whether it's putting this child on an existing route or connecting them with existing resources in the community to ensure that they get to school. So that's something that we can work with the schools with before we get to the appeals process. We'll please be assured we'll do all we can to ensure that if there is this family that there's no way, absolutely no way I can get my child to school, that we'll explore those options with the family.
I appreciate that. I think, to your point, there's no hard and fast, like this category of people or that category of people, need exactly this thing. That's not true. But we do know categorically, there are some situations in which people are more disadvantaged than others. But I really like what you said. And also, I know that I think if school leaders, building leaders know how every single student is getting to school, I know it's big ass, but that would be reassuring to me, that they know every single student has a new way to school. If they're in the family responsibility zones, but now they can take, whatever bus, or now they're in a carpool or this or that. I know that they have their eyes on every single student. in any case, but I'm really just thinking, how can we ensure that, so we're just not leaving anybody out? So thank you for that. I'll pause there.
Okay, Ms. Hogoff.
Thank you. I wanted to also just lift up that the reason why I think this is, this is a really hard thing, it'd be really, really hard to make it completely equitable, is because you're going to run into those situations too, where families are not going to trust to share their information, you know what I'm saying, in order to be supported in that way. And so I'm interested in what is the process. If a family really needs this transportation and they're overlooked or we miss them, that process of appeal that we were talking about before, I think Ms. Carter Alton brought it up in the last meeting, of I have to have transportation regardless of my economic status of where I am. This is not going to work for my family. What is that process? And that being very clear and transparent before we implement, especially if it goes as far as to implement before the end of the school year. And then I'm looking forward to Thursday, knowing if this has to be, like, is it really necessary to implement this early in order to make it work? I'll be looking for that conversation on Thursday. If there's if that's absolutely necessary, like, so one, the process for, I am that family, I'm in this zone, it's supposed to work, but it's absolutely not going to work. What do I need to do? And then on the flip side of that, for the families that are privileged, what is the, more privileged, I'll say, or more privileged and could have options, could be easier for them to take their names off of the bus list, and what is our campaign for that? How can we be more aggressive for that? I don't think that the number of people that we've heard from so far, that's all the families who would be willing to help. We're hearing from community that they want to help. They're trying to figure out why. I think there are more people, and then how would that shift the numbers? So are we doing a campaign for those families? The bigger asks, how many different ways have we done that already? I know we've done it, but how many different ways have we done it? And how would that shift the numbers? And would that make it easier so that if we were to implement something like this, it would make it easier to have spaces or, accessibility for those families that really, really need it. So that system for allowing those families to appeal if they're in those zones and really cannot get their kids to school, or, don't have the relationship to trust, to reveal whatever information they would have to reveal in order to be able to do that. Then what do they do? What is the process for us being able to hear them and then get them on a bus?
Thank you for that question. I do want to thank those families that have done that already. I've had parents come up to me and said, hey, I removed my kid from the bus, because I have that privilege. As far as official campaign, we haven't had an official campaign. We have communicated with families, and that's something that we certainly can revisit in terms of recommunicating that to families, that this is the way that if you are in a position where you can take your child to school, there's other means to get your child to school, and you can give up a seat on a bus that will help, increase route efficiency, then we can still, we can communicate that again with families.
At risk of sounding a bit evasive, I did want to offer that, and thank you for the question. The reality is that the question really gets at, in addressing these kinds of scenarios, there's going to be a need for a level of detailed, personalized information that, frankly, there is no way to create kind of a broad answer to that question. The answer to that question is that is where our building level administrators are going to come in, because they are going to be the folks. Someone asked a minute ago about principals knowing how every child arrives at school. I assure you that in this very second, with very, very, very few exceptions, virtually every principal in this district right now knows exactly how each one of their children get to school. They know who their car riders are, they know who their walkers are, they know who their bus riders are. And so those folks will be the folks who have the context and the connection that will allow them to be able to figure those things out specifically. Because the answer to that question is going to in terms of how we provide that family with the support they need to get their child to school, is going to be completely tied up in what the support is that that family needs to get to school. And it may very well be different for every individual, right? And so part of what we'll want to do is have our administrators be in a position to ask, the right questions. And we are working on a protocol that we will share with administrators to make sure that they have, that they ask the right questions in order to know what those families need. And then, from my perspective, there'll be an opportunity and a need for us to work in a bit of a dual fashion, right? Perfect example. There might be a child whose family cannot get him or her to school and is in that space. That child needs a ride to school. Well, that principal is going to know that there's another family whose child is driven to school by the parent, who might even be available to stop by and pick that child up on a daily basis if those families can partner together. But it's the people who work in the school on a daily basis who know those families that are going to know that information. They're also going to have the relationships with both sets of families that will allow them to make those introductions and to facilitate those kinds of connections. At the same time, we're going to ask our principals to communicate with us at transportation as well as in student services to share when we identify a family who really has specific needs. And that'll be the point at which we start to identify the different services that are available from around the community that we might be able to partner with that particular family. So I think it's important to note that, addressing these issues is going to require very specific, personalized information, that it would just be impossible for us to point to very broadly, but will need to be addressed on an individual family by family basis. And our help, our plan, my at least thought about what that protocol will look like is that it will start with conversations and end with the appeals process, right? Meaning the idea will be that our administrators will work both as individuals and with the collective sources and resources within the community to help families through a whole plethora of options before we get to the place where we need to go through that appeals process, with the hope that working as a community, we can address that need for that family or, with that family.
Thank you so much, Dr. King. I actually have a couple of follow-ups to that, to some of what you just shared. I was, I've heard from different schools that part of the challenge right now with connecting the volunteers with the families that need the support for carpooling or like walking groups or things like that is that administrators don't feel comfortable sharing the names and contact information for those who need support, citing liability issues, which makes it very difficult for those who want to help to help. Then they're left with just being able to kind of put out messages on listservs. I've been told also that when they tried to distribute flyers in classrooms, that was stopped because that was also a liability issue, seen as the district taking too much responsibility for carpool coordination. Can you speak a little bit to where that line is and how, given the constraints, how are families or community members supposed to be able to support their neighbors?
So I'm going to take a small swing at that and then toss it to Dr. Giovanni. But what I want to share is this. I think we want to differentiate between this kind of broad scale sharing of information, people's personalized information, in a way that might suggest, say, there's a group that says they would like to support a family. You know, I would not support giving a list of the names of students who need rides, right? That's too broad. But if I am the principal of the school and Johnny's mother comes to me and says, you know, this is what I need, and I know that there is an organization or an agency that is available to provide that information, then Johnny's, you know, mother then has the ability to give me the kind of clearance that and permission that I need to share their specific information with that community group or organization, understanding that that's the purpose of that sharing. That's particularly different than doing this kind of broad-based sharing of information where we might be in a position where we give information to folks that we haven't been authorized to provide. That having been said, and Dr. Giovanni I'm sure will share that we talked about some of those issues today in cabinet in terms of where that liability lies. And I'm not ashamed to tell you that's something that we went a few rounds about today. And we are working through, you know, as quickly as we can. Much of this is new. And we're going to be plowing some new earth as it relates to some of these questions. And so we want to be as proactive as we can be, but we also want to be careful and make sure that we don't put families and students or our educators in situations that might, you know, have them feeling compromised in terms of, you know, stepping outside of the appropriate bounds around sharing information with folks. But it speaks again to that point I was making about those personalized interactions, right? To the extent that we get to a place where we're able to have those, you know, we're in a much better place and certainly a much safer place when it comes to sharing information. If little Johnny's mama tells me, Dr. King, you can give my information to this person, this agency, this organization, that's a whole lot different than just passing out flyers and saying these are people who want to help or these are kids who need help, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It sounds like then more communication, clear communication might be needed for school administrators to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what is allowed, what's not allowed, and how to facilitate that appropriately.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note, just from a timing perspective, we are at the front end of this work, not midway. You're not towards the end. We are at the front end of this work. And so we are, you know, while transportation is working on their pieces, you know, Dr. Giovanni is working on it from her side. I'm beginning these conversations with principal supervisors. So we're at the front end of the work. There is much more communication to come as we work through some of these questions.
Thank you, Dr. King. I think he covered most of. Am I okay? Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. I think Dr. King did cover most of it, and we did discuss it in cabinet, and kind of where our operational end is that principals already have like an extremely heavy load and an extremely difficult job. And so what we have started conversations around today is continuing to flesh out those central office level supports so that it's basically just an easy handoff to principals for kind of facilitating those conversations, right? And so that's kind of what we talked about today and what that looks like. I don't know, I was unaware about people handing things out, you know, and like what that like just wasn't shared, right? And so I think as we kind of make it clearer that there's a central office person that is kind of the contact and can help facilitate those in the transportation department with our schools and principals, that I think will ease that and assist with getting those resources to our families without overly burdening our already overworked principals. I mean, they really are. And so I think what I would say is we're talking, Dr. King and Dr. Lewis lead the principals meeting. We have one Wednesday and kind of start having those conversations with them. And it's a two-way street, right? I think it's presumptuous for me or anybody to say, oh, this is what principals need. We need principals to tell us what it is that they need. They know their families and their schools. And so we're going to start that conversation and really make sure we're providing the supports that our principals and schools need, as well as our families. So again, I know it seems like a broken record, but just kind of that patience piece, but recognizing that we are in a crisis and that we do appreciate the urgency and the frustration and where our families are and wanting to know, like, how is my child going to get to school on January 22nd? So I think we could maybe have some additional information, depending on Dr. Lewis's guidance after that principals meeting. Maybe we'll have some additional things to share and kind of have more of maybe a timeline for when those packets and those supports for our principals and schools will be ready.
Thank you so much. I think, Ms. Chavez, do you have a follow-up question before we move forward?
Yes, thanks. Just on this piece, so I wanted to know, so a principal could share the name of an individual, another, say, parent A, who is offering to carpool, offering to help. And say organization, it might be a church, it might be a whatever, or not, nonprofit. They can share those and there's no liability on the district's behalf. Because that's the whole thing. We haven't vetted anyone who works for another organization, or parents have, so I just want to be clear that that's allowed, right?
That is what we are doing. It's similar to like when there's camps, et cetera, right? We
Okay.
share that information and just letting them know we haven't vetted them, we haven't done that background check, but we would be, and kind of providing like a toolkit of resources for families in those situations. And there are spaces for, like Dr. King was saying, if we can have a list, like if there's a group of a family that's struggling, right? Like has just been like, there's no way, I just cannot get my child to school, et cetera, that we would then work with them in that toolkit and they could, and again, with transportation central office supporting the schools and saying, okay, are you okay with us maybe sharing your information, or vice versa, right? A two-way street. So, you want to make sure that not only are we handing somebody a flyer, because people have different levels of comfort, right? And reaching out, and different levels of comprehension. And so making sure that it is a two-way street, but that they do understand that, we're not saying, that this person is safe necessarily, but for you to be able to talk with them and say, is this somebody that you as a parent, have met with and vetted and are comfortable with? They are offering this service. So I do think that that's, really the only way. And we are prepared, and we do that, for other things in schools as well. So as I indicated before, and like Dr. King just said, we're kind of at the front end of this, we're all, you know, I just came up with this new saying that no one's ever heard before, that we are building this plane as we fly it. So, but just wanting to make sure that, nothing is off the table as far as making sure our students get to school, but it needs to be safe. And we do have to protect the district, but we don't want to let that be a barrier, like being overly cautious be a barrier to making sure that these resources, our families have access to these resources, and our generous community partners who want to help have that access as well.
Yeah.
I'm being told that we need to take a quick recess for IT reasons. Do you have, can what you're going to say hold,
Yeah.
or would you like to make one more statement
I can
before?
hold.
Okay. Okay. So we will recess quickly. Okay, and we're back. Thank you all for your patience. Um, Board members, anyone else have questions or comments to share? Ms. Pyer?
So I just want to start with gratitude, Dr. Lewis, for you and your team for indulging us in this called meeting. I think we've just come out of the holiday season. Staff were supposed to be getting a well-deserved break, and I know that they've been working on this urgently for us and for our families. I appreciate the calls to equity from colleagues. I know that that is unanimously shared by this board, but also by your leadership team. And so I know that as you all are continuing to lead us through this crisis, that you will continue to bring that focus, bring the individual attention that each and every family needs as we support our students. I'm glad to hear that the family responsibility zone maps will be released and in a more transparent way. I think after the last press coverage, there was so much misinformation shared that it's important to me that as much as possible, we try to bring clarity to what we are doing to address a crisis that is not DPS created, but is created by chronic underfunding by the state of North Carolina, a labor market that has shifted post-pandemic, and particularly wages that we are using local money to supplement when the state needs to raise driver pay, needs to provide resources to districts across the state of North Carolina. And so I know as we draft our legislative agenda, we'll be looking to you all for things that we can add that specifically address this, that put the responsibility firmly where it is with the state of North Carolina. I look forward to, as we move forward, seeing, I hope, attendance data or some type of, here's how many of our students that are bus riders that we were able to transport. And I'm hoping that the rotational service is actually leading to improvements as we move towards longer term solutions. I appreciate you continuing to reiterate that, 100% staffing and actually overstaffing is where we aspire to be as quickly as possible. But as we work with the state, one thing that we heard last time was there's a significant delay in getting drivers licensed. Once we are piloting this program in Durham, right, to train our own drivers, to get them their own CDLs and the licensure that they need, we're waiting, tick tock. The state could help us with that. And so ways that we can advocate, our community can advocate for that, I think would be helpful. You all have prioritized with an equity lens. You've prioritized McKinney-Vento students. You've prioritized students with exceptional needs. And so I know you will continue to do that in the planning going forward. I wanted to thank Mr. Palmer for being online and the attention he's paid to all of our questions that came late, frankly. People were concerned that materials weren't posted. Our questions were coming late all through the weekend, I think, and even today. I want to thank Ms. Brookshire and Ms. Fullwood, who is here, who are really leading incredibly complex work as we transport and work to transport every student as efficiently and thoughtfully as possible and safely. I think the maps coming forward, I think more information coming about the family responsibility zones. I was noticing that a lot of people's emails were coming with concerns, but perhaps they just need more information. They need to know that my child's bus will be at this high school at Northern at 8 in the morning, and that's where I can pick them up at 4:30, right? They need the details of where, express stops, right? I'm mixing my two strategies here, sorry. But I think as further details are shared with families, they will have more clarity about how it will impact their family directly. And so I think that information coming forward will be helpful. these are impossibly difficult decisions to make, but I also want you all and your team to be empowered to move forward as aggressively as you need to. I've never been convinced that the board needs to weigh on these. I think you all are authorized and empowered to do whatever is needed to move this through this crisis as quickly as possible. I did note language equity concerns. I was glad to see we had 15% responses in Spanish to the survey, but hope that there's work that we can do to continue to reach out and engage in that community. And I know often that's not an email, but maybe it's a WhatsApp, maybe it's a trusted community member that they may engage with more directly. I look forward to hearing more as you all continue to bring plans of just lessons from our drivers and what would make retention and uplifting their profession and their longevity assured, and their desire to work in Durham. I think North Carolina has worked by poaching drivers from other districts for a very long time. A lot of districts used our COVID federal money, which is now evaporated, to beg, borrow, and steal bus drivers. And so that money has clearly ended. That ability to pay sub-drivers a lot has ended. I think North Carolina needs a deep, deep investment at the state level into this profession. And as you all are helping us craft ways that we can work on this strategy so that we not only address it this year, get 100% of students that need rides to school this year, but that we overstaff in the coming years and have personnel that love working in Durham and love working with our students specifically. If they have needs for, if there are behavior challenges, that we have strategies for addressing those issues and things that we hear from our drivers. I think that's going to be critical. So I guess I've said a lot without asking a lot of questions, but I do consider our team to be unanimous in our focus on equity and addressing this crisis urgently together. And I'm just so appreciative that you've brought further information and that we'll have more on Thursday as we continue to move forward. Centering students, always centering students. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Byer. Any other comments from anybody else before I make a couple? Yes, Ms. Chavez.
I just want to kind of come back to this. I noted that we had received the most messages with concerns about express stops. I have the most concerns about express stops. The supervision issue seems significant. I think, Mr. Palmer, what you said was like if supervision is an issue for children, the parent should wait until the drop off, last drop off point, if I heard that correctly. But I would say all of the children should be supervised. I know some students might have more tendencies to, act up or whatever, but also I'm just concerned about the rollout of that part. Also, my understanding is there are no, or let me back up. A number of people have asked if they're about walkable routes to the express stops, if they would be walkable. And I was under the impression that a lot of our middle school and high school areas are maybe not as walkable. I mean, they might be from some areas, but maybe don't have as great a zone that would be walkable compared to the elementary schools where we're implementing family express stop or family. Now I'm mixing them. Family responsibility zones. So I just want to note that that's where I'm at right now with the express stops. I know we asked for, I forget the exact language, but like more of a plan around like with family resources, like how this would look. Um, but I'm very concerned about the effect of this, implementing this, if, if it will have a drastic kind of impact on who applies, in the lottery as it's open right now this month. So I just wanted to note that. And if you want to respond to any of that, it'd be great.
Dr. Webb?
Thank you. One of your points, Ms. Chavez, thank you for all that, but very well said. Just spoke with Ms. Brookshire, for the express stops. The priority there was to get stops near where the children lived. Schools closest to it, so the walkability, the suitability for walk zones or that type of thing was not the priority. It was to get them as close to where the children were as possible. So, I mean, there was no conscientious effort to choose sites with sidewalks. It was what is the closest, as the crow flies, destination to hop on an express to go to your school. But your point was well made. Just wanted to share that. We do know that answer.
Okay. I really appreciate the comments from all my colleagues this evening, both the gratitude that was expressed by Ms. Spire and the questions and concerns from Ms. Harold Goffin, Ms. Chavez, and would echo all of that. And then so I only have a couple other things to add, I think, things I wanted to clarify further. The first is, again, going back to this, we keep calling it appeals, but basically like what happens when somebody has no other way to get to school? And we've talked about it in the context of family responsibility, but it could be maybe for Express Stop too, I don't know. And I guess Dr. King, you said you're working on protocols that would enable them to ask the right questions, the administrators, to assess a family's needs. I'm wondering, in your mind, does that mean that, and then I was looking at policy 6322, indicating that the parents, guardians can request bus services. These go to the principal. And then it continues to say, could be forwarded to the superintendent, designee, if denied by them, right, go to the board. So could there be a process whereby a principal could approve, or the principal could then forward the request for bus service to transportation? As you noted earlier, we don't want them all to be going to the board. I'd like this, and as we've said before, we want this to be clear, transparent, easy I don't just want like somebody doesn't have a way to get to school, so we reach out to a community entity. I want a process whereby the district can approve bus service for that family if they don't have another way to get to school, and do it without that family jumping through a bunch of hoops or needing some special. Does that all make sense? Sorry, that's a lot to say. Could you please clarify?
So it makes sense. I'm a little wary, though, because I would not want to. It seems to me that if the purpose of the process in the policy is for transportation to be approved at some point, I don't know that we would want to put a process in place that would allow someone at the school level to make that approval short of the board's decision. Because that feels like it puts a building level person in a pretty difficult spot, in that they have to be the person to say yes or no. I think right now, the way at least I envision this process is that the staff members at the school would be in positions to try to facilitate connections that make things work for families, rather than being the heavy who have to say, I know that you have a difficult situation, but you can have this or you can't have that. At risk of sounding trite a little bit, I think we would want to reserve that kind of heavy-handed response for the folks who are elected to do that, rather than putting our principals in that space. Now, certainly would be glad to hear the will of the board as it relates to that. But if I'm honest, I do feel like that might be a little bit of a difficult circumstance to put building level administrators in.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And it's my preference as a single board member that not all of these requests go to the board. And so what is can the school administrators be the facilitator and then that go to transportation whereby there's a process to assess the hardship or the need, and then it can get approved prior to, and as called designee of the superintendent or something like that. And I don't know if there's an appetite. It sounded like my colleagues were interested in something similar, but I'm not certain.
So I think I better study the policy a little bit closer before I get that deep into it. I mean, I think I think our goal would be the same as yours. Our whole purpose here is to, as I envision the process and as I've laid it out, again, the appeals process is all the way at the end of this process. And our vision, my vision for this is that we will be, working diligently with each family, through numerous steps before we get to that place, with the hope that we can find something that works for everybody before we get to that point. I want to study the policy a little bit closer and make sure that that's something that can happen. But I certainly hear what you're driving at and what the board is suggesting there.
Ms. Chavez or Mr. Hilgoff?
My, thank you. I understand, what you were saying about, looking for every option before it comes to the appeals process. I'm thinking about this also as a solution, for the long-term solution about ridership in general. And thinking about what is the process of identifying those families that should get priority ridership over other families that would be willing, to, who say, I can do this, I don't need that ridership. That's the part of it that's a little bit muddy for me. I just want to make sure that with that, as we're, wearing our equity lens, that there is a process for prioritizing those families that absolutely, for whatever circumstance, would not be able to ride the bus. So if they go through the principal and things like that, but they get to that process, it's more than just they're appealing for the ride, but what is that process if it is, because then that could affect the numbers and the ridership and everything else, and it could help with the buses that are available. So as we're thinking about what that appeal process looks like, what is the process for making sure that, those, rather than, even if we can find, maybe there is another solution, like you can do this carpool or, this organization, or they make these connections. How do we also, identify, if we're going to, as we're tightening up, these are the families that really need the rides. Let's make sure they get on a bus. And then all the other things are for everybody, who doesn't necessarily have to have it. So that's the kind of appeal process that I'm thinking about. And sometimes I don't feel like some of those families, again, there's a relationship trust issue where they may not be willing to just go through the principal, or, is there a process if they don't want to share all of that information with their community for whatever reason? Is there a process for them to still be able to get there formally to make their own personal appeal, of why they should be able to? I feel like somehow with that in addition to the work that we're doing to identify families that would give up their bus seats could bring some balance to.
So I think that's something that we can work through and think through. Part of the one challenge, that I see with that is, we talked about putting staff in certain kinds of difficult positions. I also don't want to put staff in positions where they are in a scenario where they are essentially overriding board policy at the school level. Because that becomes, you know, a kind of difficult space too, for our building level administrators. And, you know, again, that's one of the reasons why generally these kinds of processes end at a board appeal, because it's the board's policy. And so as a general rule, when we start talking about a scenario where we're going to operate outside of the board's policy, we don't want to create a scenario where either building level or district level employees make that decision, right? Because that's difficult for us.
I agree.
Yeah. So I think we'll want to keep, you know, that concern in mind, but find a way to really, you know, straddle that line, because, you know, we don't want to set a precedent, you know, even in this scenario. I think that district level staff, building level staff somehow have the authority to circumvent what the board's policy has laid down. We want to save that kind of decision for you all to make, to the extent that we can. And I hope that doesn't sound like I'm dancing, but that's a little bit of a slippery slope, I think.
Yeah, I think it's, if it needs to come to the board, I think that is important. I'm looking for ways to even if we can accommodate a family that really needs that support,
Absolutely.
I'm looking for ways to give those families priority seating. And then also ways for other families to be able to identify themselves as, you know, I can give up this seat,
Yeah.
you know,
And
I don't really need it.
I feel confident saying, and Dr. Lewis hadn't kicked me under the table yet. I feel confident saying we will approach each of these situations with that as the mindset, while also trying to leave ourselves short of crossing over that line, of stepping into the space where the board ought to reside.
Ms. Chavez.
So what I want to comment on this policy and how I'm thinking about it now from this conversation is that if a family says, I need transportation, I'm in a family responsibility zone, but I really, I don't feel, my child is a kindergartner, they, you know, I don't feel safe with them walking to school or what have you. And I rely on bus service because of these, you know, factors, with our household. Would it be that they would be presented an option to either access the community resources, whether that's individual families, carpool connection, you know, family, you know, connections there, or an organization, or that's one box, or they say, I don't trust people like that. I want to ride the school bus. And that's the only way I want them to get to school, because that's what I choose. So then they're offered the appeals process. I'm just thinking of a chart in my head of what we're offering them first. That's what this conversation has brought up for me. I think there already are a lot of, you know, informal networks at our schools where parents rely on each other. And, you know, some schools have more robust PTAs than others. But I think, not that that's everything, but, you know, there are other networks too. In any case, but anyway, I think it'd be helpful to know, are they offered kind of those two things, the community resources and then also the appeals process? Or are we saying that we're really gonna, you know, try to steer them toward the community resources first, and then if that's as a last resort, the appeals process? Now, the other thing, as I'm looking at the policy, thank you, Ms. Carter-Otten, for directing us to the language of the policy. The way I read it is that if a parent applies for bus service, the request should be made to the principal, but then the principal or other designated official shall forward the application to the superintendent or designee. So I was reading it as the principal would not make the decision. It would be the superintendent or designee. And I think that what, I would invite others to share their thoughts on this. We might want to strengthen this policy because what it says is that the superintendent or designee shall consider applications for transportation services in the following situations. 1, when factors are present that may endanger the safety of students walking to the school. 2, when the student is medically certified as temporarily incapacitated. So the second one is more clear and like documented. The first is not as clear how we would determine that. Because somebody could say your student is a 5th grader, they're safe walking to school, they don't have to cross any major roads, there are sidewalks the whole way. But the parent says, no, that's not safe for them for these reasons, So I think, and the hardship is not, if I'm reading this correctly, is not in this. So the word hardship, and we've had a conversation about, what that means when we go to our school transfer policy. But in any case, I'm wondering if we want to strengthen this policy. So that it's very clear, and there is sort of some criteria by which we would prioritize, to use your word, students who want bus service. And I also just want to say that I share the energy around asking people with privilege to continue to use that privilege as they can. I appreciate that it seems like there are many people who are doing that, who are trying to say, I can do these things. I have the time, all of the resources, I can help. But I think that has to continue to be an ask, because things kind of have to balance out at some point. So.
Thank you, Ms. Chavez. I think, Dr. Webb, you had something you wanted to share.
Thank you, ma'am. To one point, Ms. Chavez, that specifically of the items you listed, I don't foresee a situation where there's a request where we would not offer the full palette of what we can do at the school level and what we can accommodate. Some of what you're talking about happens on a daily basis with our students needing to change routes today, and our team does a good job of making that decision without appealing it to the board. If it's a way to put a child on a bus, they're going to do that. Dr. Lewis mentioned earlier, if there's a bus that's close by that's already running, can we get that child? Is there room for them on that bus? So there's a lot of options before we even get to any type of appeal process. I would, though, in full, just trying to have the full picture, the reason we're having to do these things is because we don't have enough bus drivers currently. So, if we have to make very surgical decisions sometimes with those appeals, and we'll have to define what that looks like moving forward. But my point behind all this was to say there's a lot that can happen to accommodate families before it even gets to the appeal level, specifically at the school level or even at the transportation level as well.
Yes, Ms. Byer.
So we've had a lot of conversation about express stops. And so I've been over here kind of looking at our neighbors. And if I'm checking websites right, I think Wake County already does express stops. I think Charlotte-Mecklenburg does express stops. I think Guilford does express stops. I think all of them seem to do family responsibility zones that many of them are using a true 1.5 mile radius, which is state statute. And so I do want to acknowledge that I think these strategies are already being employed by a lot of our counterparts in the state and have been for many, many, many years. It is stressful to think about doing them mid-year in Durham as a crisis response, but I do think there is precedent for districts having to move to these strategies in order to deal with the low staffing levels that we're facing. Are we currently using express stops for CTE pathway students, for other programs within the district? Because I don't think we've talked about that, but I thought that we were. Is that true, Ms. Fullwood? I don't know. I want to put you on the spot. I thought that we were currently utilizing that strategy, not just for School for Creative Studies.
Yes, ma'am. Currently, CTE students that are attending a program that is not within their school district, they go to their base school and are picked up. So if a student is attending Northern, but they live in the Southern district, they have to go to Southern to catch a bus to their school. And then, I mean, our Hillside has their IB program. We provide a bus stop if that stop is already a stop in place for our IB students.
Thank you so much. I think making sure that we're clear about what we're already doing, how it's working, and how we're able to keep students safe while doing that is helpful to reassure folks that this can be done well and efficiently and safely for students and families. None of these changes are easy to contemplate. They really aren't, and particularly changes that in Durham, we love to give people a long time window to know that changes are coming. Like we did it when we changed start times. We gave folks 18 months, Dr. Lewis, which is really unheard of, but we wanted people to know it was coming. And so having to make these decisions in crisis is really extra challenging for our families. And so you hear that, and I think in a lot of our questions about how we can be as gentle as possible with families in these changes. But if we could get to 100% of students that need to get to school within weeks rather than months, I mean, I think that's our shared goal. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Byer. Some of my other questions were along the lines of what Ms. Byer, you shared earlier about how we're hearing a lot from folks about express stops, but it feels like some of it's just because there's not been a lot of information out there. So where things feel like a black box, it feels scary sometimes, right? So I was wondering, I'm hoping that we could flesh that out a little bit more soon. As I was thinking through this, I was remembering, and I wanted to just clarify, that I thought it was stated that the drop-off time would be 7:15 to 7:45. Maybe some of these are still in conversation and not just fully decided yet, but I was remembering 7:15 to 7:45, and they would be at middle and high schools in someone's Growing Together region. Is that what has been shared? Is that true? Did I imagine that? And if that's not true, what is the case? Like, what can be said about drop-off times, windows, and where these stops might be? Relatedly, I think the communication that came out to families via email on December 20th said that caregivers need to stay with their student. So would that mean they just hang out for that half-hour window then? Or what's the vision for how this works?
Mr. Palmer, are you still with us?
I am indeed, Dr. Webb. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Carter-Otten, for the question. There'll be several respondents on it, myself as well as Ms. Fullwood. Let me give a high level, and then Annie, if you're available, provide additional details if helpful. I want to reset the board and the community that our start times for middle and high school are at, again, right in that 8:20 to 8:30 window for middle and for high school at 9:15. The benefit of staggering drop-off times at the 7:15 to 7:45 window, again, Ms. Carter, on to your point, we want to be precise with that so that families that are utilizing the service and students arriving at these express hubs, whether they are driven by a family member, take the Go Durham bus, and many of these sites are Go Durham eligible. I know Ms. Brookshire is with us as well as other colleagues that are working with Go Durham on transit alignment. Accessing those express hub stops wherein, as Ms. Fullwood pointed out, we're doing for CTE and creative studies currently and carrying them into the final destination, whether that's DSA, Rogers Her, or creative studies. That is about an hour in advance of the bell time itself, which is intended to stagger any sort of traffic concerns there. Again, on the other side of it, we have a bell time release at the 3:20 to 3:30 window for middle school, with an understanding that those express buses are arriving at middle and high schools on the back end, typically a 15 to 20-minute service window. So to clarify that again, or just to sort of reboot it there, I think Ms. Carter-Otten, you were asking about possibly any concerns about traffic mode conflicts, particularly in that morning window. These express stops are designed to stagger in an alternate fashion with the middle and high school bell times. I think you can see with the high school one, for example, 7:30 for a locational drop when high school arrival times are typically closer to that 8:45 to 9 o'clock window. So we are intentional about understanding that currently creative studies has over a dozen express stops. And in those instances, when we can stagger the times, it reduces any stress or conflict particularly for car riders. So wanted to pause there and ask Ms. Fullwood, any additional context, Ms. Fullwood, that you wanted to add for Ms. Carter-Otten?
Yes, we try and strategically base the times for pickup when the buses would, how long it would take that bus to leave their elementary school to get to their, that middle school stop. And it would take about 15 to 20 minutes barring traffic. So that's why those pickup times would be typically between 7:15 and 7:45 as to how long it would take for them to get to their location after they have let their students off of the bus and been released to start their next run, which is typically about the same time that it would happen anyway if we were going to their homes. Is the buses are expected to leave within 15 to 20 minutes of their departure time, and most pickups start around 7:30, 7:45 in the morning, trying to get to their home addresses. So we're hoping to have those buses sitting and waiting for the majority of the stops for parents to get there, and that it would be a smooth transition.
Okay, that's very helpful. So just to confirm, so as of now, the pickup window, you all anticipate it being between 7:15 and 7:45 in the morning for the express stops. Is that?
That's the anticipation, but as we start working on the pairings and seeing how quickly we can get the buses to those areas, some stops could go a little later, but it takes that, looking at how we move. Once we say, okay, this bus will be doing this, then what's it going to be paired with? So we have to make sure that once it's paired with the things, other runs, how fast or how soon it can get to its location.
Okay, that makes sense. So say I'm a parent of a student at Rogers Her, and I'm trying to plan, when will I learn what my drop off and pickup window is? And how large will that window be? Because again, will they have to sit and wait with their student? Which does feel different than a pickup time in the morning from a bus where the student could walk to their bus stop and wait on their own. So that's
We're hoping after we have it all fleshed out is that the wait time shouldn't be more than 15 to 20 minutes. We're hoping for that, but we won't be able to see that until we actually see that these routes are in place. We have the stops in place, and I have a listing of the preliminary times of when these buses would get there, but that's without having done the extra work of where this bus will be coming from and making sure that that is a viable bus to do that stop.
okay. All right. Thank you so much. I was to follow up to what was my if so far families have been notified if they are going to, if there is planning underway for them to have an express stop. Is that right?
Yes.
And then when will they be notified of where their express stop is and what time the drop off and pickup is?
I'll need to speak with my team concerning that on when they would like to release that information. Like I said, I have preliminary data. And I just want to make sure that before we put that data out, that we've actually made sure that it is, the best data for the parents to be able to plan. They could see, this information, and there may be some slight changes after we've evaluated some of the distances that parents may have to travel to get to those locations. We do know that we have some students that live a little further out from what their closest school would be. So some of those items may need to be reevaluated as to where their school pickup would be. And so those are things that we still need to flesh out. But right now we do have a sense of where everyone's stop would be according to how they're actually routed now.
Okay, I appreciate that. This feels like an enormous task you all are undertaking right now. I can see in your face it is. Um, um, I, and yeah, I'm asking because if I were a parent that was going to be affected by this, it would take me a couple of weeks at least to be able to figure out how to make the changes I needed. So I would need that information. But I also really appreciate that you're trying to make sure it's the right information that you're sharing. So thank you. I think, well, also I'm sure you all are also thinking about the logistics of like where these, I guess I'm wondering how this fits with current like carpool patterns. Like will the express stop be where the carpool drop off is at that school, or does it just really vary by school depending on the needs and the infrastructure that's there?
Would vary by the infrastructure, but the plan was to utilize our bus parking lot because that's the most room for parents to be able to come in and out. And we'd have to look at each location and the logistics of that. We're hoping to be there in a time frame where we won't have to compete with existing car queues, because we should be in and out before those car queues actually begin. In the afternoons, we're hoping to be there right after those car queues should be gone because of the time frame that we're coming in.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then my last question, which I'd raised to you during that recess briefly, was I'm wondering if we could see the distance from families' houses to their express stop, ideally as like a minimum, a maximum, like a range, and then a medium, or a median and a mean, something to help us understand the burden for families. As I know y'all are looking at that too, but if the board could see that so that we just have a better sense for what we're giving a thumbs up to.
So I did put together a spreadsheet. Over the weekend, I put together a spreadsheet for the individual schools, but did not include the distance. I can rerun that report tonight and add the distance and provide a spreadsheet that shows that preliminary data of those projected distances. We already know, looking at that there are some distances that we'll need to look at and see if there's another school. We tried to really concentrate on using middle school and high school, but in some instances, if there is a way to cut down the distance for a student that may be above 5 miles and use an elementary school, then we'll have to, those are the things that we have to consider.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Colleagues, I'm sorry, Dr. Webb.
Madam Vice Chair, thank you. Mr. Palmer, I think has some insight to some of your questions. So Mr. Palmer.
Well, thank you, Dr. Webb. I think just some clarifying remarks with regards to the expectations and the ask of families. It might be helpful to think of express stops as just a a big bus stop, if you will. So many families currently at the bus stops will wait with their students until the bus arrives at a neighborhood level even. We are not requiring families to wait for the bus as much as for families that may have a safety concern or otherwise, that is an option for families if they were to choose either being there, until the bus arrives in the morning or being there prior to the bus's arrival in the afternoon. Just wanted to clarify, it's not a requirement as much as oftentimes in other urban school systems that deploy express stops, that's sort of ensuring that families understand that, it's okay if you can't make it right when the bus is there. That said, when you are there, it expedites the amount of time that the student's on another campus and accelerates overall the level of knowing if that's a concern for families. So just wanted to point that out, that it's not a requirement, but it is for families that have a safety concern or otherwise around supervision. That is an additional option to be there before and after school.
That is helpful. So it is not a requirement that families stay with their students at an express bus stop, but it is a option and maybe a preference. Right.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yes, ma'am. And I also wanted to clarify that it is the goal, and what we've communicated with families is that we will notify or communicate with families by the end of this week regarding the express stops. So that's the goal that transportation is working towards, to finalize locations with the principals and to message families on stop time and place. So they've been doing a lot of calisthenics with this over the holidays and working different scenarios. So, but that is the goal at this point.
Thank you. Colleagues, are there other questions or comments you'd like to make? Yes, Ms. Byer.
So I know that we discussed this the last time, but I think it would be helpful as we move forward for y'all to let us know your recommendations and the notion about weighing this end to rotational coverage at the time that we promised, and whether y'all feel fully ready to move forward with both of these strategies at this time. I think that's the reassurance that would be helpful to me as y'all have worked on this really incredibly complex work. Knowing that some questions you will need to see how things roll forward and adapt, but that your level of confidence in the readiness of things to move forward, I think on Thursday would continue to be helpful as we move forward. Thank you.
I agree with that. So what you're asking for is for that to come Thursday in addition to.
I trust it will, because I think y'all are it sounds like in cabinet wrestling with the same questions that we're discussing tonight. Just these logistical changes for families and making sure that we are ready as we can be.
And I think another question that would be helpful for us to talk more about, I think, on Thursday is if we move forward with both of these, are we saying we're going to be doing that for the remainder of this school year? Or is that saying like this is, Ms. Harold Goff kind of referenced this earlier, like, is this the new normal? Is that the plan? Because I think those might be different things for the board to be considering, like what we're doing for this year versus next. And as we all know, this is lottery season, so I think we need to be giving people very clear information about what to expect next year very soon as they're making decisions about what schools they're able to attend. And yes, Dr. Giovanni.
You want that addressed on Thursday, just kind of like long-term? I think we need to consult with like Dr. Lewis and kind of determine that. So just making sure you weren't wanting us, we're not prepared to
yes.
answer that today.
No,
Okay.
Thursday.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Thursday, that would be very helpful. Anything else from colleagues? Other requests for Thursday, Ms. Byer?
No, I just, as y'all are continuing to lead and frankly through crisis, I think that could be a maybe answer. Like, I don't know how much clarity you will have. I know you will hope to have more clarity, but, yeah, I,
Yeah, thank you for that. And as I alluded to that at an earlier meeting, is as we're looking at what has been referenced, and these are Band-Aid, and I've stated these are Band-Aid solutions, is that we are looking at long-term, because I don't want to continue to be reactionary, in terms of setting the system up and being proactive. Yes, there are some things that we are doing and will continue to do to address retention and recruitment. And if the bus driver shortage doesn't get better, despite our efforts, what have we done during this time, during this crisis, to set the system up for future success? So yes, we definitely will be able to share as families, and I do recognize and understand the hardship in the middle of the year that we are placing on families. And so as we're going through this, we owe it to our families to, as you mentioned, the magnet applications to, and just any families that are either contemplating on coming to Durham Public Schools, that they know that this is the transportation situation for next year and years to come. So yes, we definitely will be able to share some long-term strategies and what we're thinking as we are grappling through this.
That sounds great. Anything else from administration? Dr. Giovanni?
Just want to just in advance understand that this is new. And so today was the deadline to get the PowerPoint submitted. And so it may be that there may be some delay in getting kind of a transportation to address some of your stuff from today and your request for today, but we will be working diligently to have that. But I just want to note that it probably won't be up in maybe Wednesday, maybe Thursday morning, but we will have a PowerPoint for you. So just want to be respectful. I do appreciate, I know families want to see that, and have some things in writing. And so just wanted to put that out there for the board and the community.
Thank you. Any final words, Dr. Lewis, before we close?
I know it has been stated this evening. I think it bears repeating, and that's appreciation for our transportation staff. Learning about the special call meeting, then coming back Friday, getting the questions midday, some of the questions midday, and trying to put answers to the questions in a presentation as well as today. And they spent about 75% of their day in cabinet meeting preparing for tonight, and now we'll continue to prepare for Thursday. But I do want to, again, echo those sentiments to our transportation team that's here and present, and those that are working behind the scenes to make sure that, and I think it was stated today, we all have the same goal in mind, and that's to ensure that we are providing reliable transportation, getting all of our students to school, because their academics are hugely important to us, and we have goals. And it's difficult to be the premier and the best school district in the country if we can get kids to school. And so please know, community, parents, board, that we are taking this very serious and want to come out on the other end that much more successful. So thank you all so much for your engagement this evening.
Thank you. We will see everybody on Thursday for our work session. And with that, this meeting's adjourned.